Thank you so much. And hi there, welcome everybody. Thanks for inviting me here, and thanks for listening to me. So, I don't know how it is with you, but I noticed over the years when I'm going to conferences that there are roughly two kinds of keynote speakers picking up on me as comments, right? One is the Yoda, the sage, the elder member of the community that tells us where we've come from and where we are and why we're here and where we might go, and that all is going to be okay in the end. And then the other one is this sort of slightly left of field, wacky outsider, the one goth at a beauty pageant who might say something outrageously silly or obvious, but thereby maybe also has a chance to say something that makes you go, well, that wasn't obvious, that's actually interesting. And my hope is that I'm sort of this kind of second type of keynote speaker, the one odd guy. So, a bit about me. I crisscross between games industry and interaction design industry and academia. At a certain point in time, I thought that there's tons of stuff that we can learn from games in other design disciplines that are not games. So that's where I did a lot of practical work. That's what I wrote and co-edited a book about with MIT Press. And then earlier this year, I ended up in the shores of the UK, in York, with the Digital Creativity Labs and the Center for Digital Heritage. And although I'm a games person, that means if there is anything around digital heritage or heritage in museums that has to do with play and games and engagement design and crowdsourcing and AI and machine learning or anything like that, come talk to me later. Would love to talk with all of you. But enough about me. Let's start with the thing that the keynote is actually about, designing for curiosity. For that, I would like to start with two little stories or two little examples. The first one is literally curiosity, because it was called Curiosity. That was the name under which this weird game by Peter Molyneux launched in 2012. Some of you might remember it from the media. It was a free iOS and Android app with the claim, just what's inside the box? And what's inside the box, according to Peter Molyneux's wonderful rhetoric, is life-changingly amazing. But we won't tell you what it is. And it is hidden underneath 69 billion little digital cubes. And the idea is that collectively, on one persistent servers, the point is that users would click away all of these little cubes so that one user who would click away the final cube would get at what the thing is that is hidden inside the box. And so users did on their mobile phones. They tapped happily away at all those little boxes. In the first months, that thing got up to 3 million users, 800,000 active daily users who clicked away 5 billion cubes in the first month. So there is something about just hiding stuff in a box that apparently works. My second example, also launched in 2012, the website Upworthy, started by Ella Pariser and colleagues who wanted to find and share things that matter online and drive viral attention to them. And they managed to be the fastest growing website, media site in history online. They got 6 million unique users per month in the first 12 months. They got 90 million unique users in the first 18 months. They are now about the 18th largest US site in traffic, and they have the third most Facebook likes and shares per article of any news or media site out there. And they managed to do all of that with 7.5 articles per day. In fact, if you look at the kind of the relation between articles that they publish versus the kind of Facebook shares that they get, there are basically kind of 3, 4, 5, 6 orders of magnitude better than all the other standard ones that you would assume, so The Onion, BuzzFeed, Mashable, and so on, which obviously raises the question, how? How the heck did they manage to do that? It's not the only answer, but one of the important answers to that question is, well, it's all about the headline. It's all about the way that Upworthy started to write their headlines back in 2012. And that's not just me who observed that. Pretty early on after 2012, you started to notice that a lot of other media sites took notice of that and adapted to that, right? Papers like The Atlantic said, why are Upworthy headlines suddenly everywhere with Mashable and other sites? And then particularly snarky journalists thought, well, we can kind of mimic we can kind of mimic Upworthy headlines while writing about them. So you saw stuff like, read this to find out how Upworthy's awful headlines changed the web. On the Guardian. So what makes a viral headline? So what is the thing that they did about headline design that was different from other headlines before 2012? to answer that question, I nicked a little slide from their own little slide deck. This is one that they created and shared at South by Southwest, where they just made this little pop quiz because it's early in the morning. We need a pop quiz. Which one of these two headlines, which they tested, they A/B tested that, do you think got more clicks? Is it A hidden camera show is baffled when they can't find any bigots in Texas? Or B, a hidden camera show goes to Texas. They did not expect to find this. Who says it's A? Okay, 1, 2, 3. Who says it's B? Majority of them. Yes, exactly. Twice the clicks on B versus A. And in said slide deck on South by Southwest, they shared how they did that, how they designed these headlines, and what is it about them. What is it about them is that they create a so-called curiosity gap. That's their word for it, which is they are specific enough that they hint at a certain information that you might find interesting, but they're not concrete enough that they're actually giving the information away, and therefore you're then engaged to actually click on it. So if you're not specific enough, if you're too vague, you're not creating anything that's actually interesting, that stirs my attention, right? So something like, a guy invented this thing, you're like, If you're too specific, you're giving away the information, right? An inventor launches a new 3D printer at the conference. So the thing at the sweet spot, the curiosity gap in the middle is, this epic, I don't know why it must be a thing, or anyhow, makes the internet look like a coloring book, right? That sets you up like, oh, how can I turn the internet into a coloring book without giving away how that works? So Upworthy and curiosity, what's inside the goop, I think are two wonderful digital examples that curiosity as a motive, right? Interest in information definitely drives engagement in the web. And I would argue that it's also the lifeblood of any kind of museum engagement, right? If people are not curious about an exhibit or an exhibition anymore, they're going to walk away. This is the main motive that drives people towards museums, I would argue, and through museums. So that raises then the obvious question, how do we drive engagement? Can we design in order to make stuff more curiosity-inducing? Well, for that, first we need to have a little look into psychology and understand how does curiosity actually work psychologically. And I've shamelessly took together and mangled a couple of the psychological research literature into my own little model. If you're interested, links to that, links to further literature and background will be in the online slides, so for your easy reference. But basically, right now, psychologists think that curiosity has evolved as a basic motive like hunger or thirst for us to seek out novel stimuli so that we're better able to assess and make predictions about our environment, and therefore are more likely to survive. And for something to stir our curiosity, it basically needs 5 things. First, it needs something that actually draws our attention, that points us to something in the environment that might be relevant. Some invitation, some hints. Say you walk across the savannah and you suddenly find a track in the ground, right? You might find a track on the ground. So that there is an invitation. And then that needs some very specific features for it to actually be curiosity-inducing. First, it needs to be unpredictable, right? There needs to be something that I say, I have a hunch what this might be. This might be an antelope, or this might be a lion, but I don't know for sure, right? If I know for sure, it's not curiosity-inducing. I know the solution. But if I don't know, it might be. The second one is it needs to be relevant, right? So if I look at the trail and I say, oh yeah, that's a bug, that's a stinky bug. I don't care about stinky bugs. You walk away. It doesn't stir curiosity. Whereas if you're hungry and you say, oh, could be an antelope trail, right? Suddenly it might pique your curiosity. The third one is it has to be solvable. If the trail suddenly disappears in the sand and there's no way for you to follow it up, you say, well, that's nice, but there is no way for me to going about that, so therefore you'll also lose interest in the thing. But if it's unpredictable and it's relevant and you sense, oh, I can actually follow the trail, then it piques your curiosity. And then the final quality has to be that it feels safe enough that you actually want to find out what the thing is that you can't predict for sure, right? Because if you look at the trail and say, that's a tiger, or it might be a tiger, it will probably trigger fear, not curiosity. But if it's something tasty or interesting, it will probably trigger curiosity, or it might trigger a combination of the both at once, right? That's also pretty common as a situation. So that's how curiosity works, right? We have invitations towards something that's unpredictable, relevant, solvable, and safe. then we have the recipe for that. And that, again, sounds a bit abstract. Just to give you a practical example how that translates into these kind of Upworthy headlines. So the invitation here is very obvious, right? It's an invitation we all learned exists, which is a link, a hyperlink that leads us to some other information. This one just says, click me, find out what it is, right? It's not fully predictable the way that headline is set up, right? It says there is a shocking truth about what it would cost, but it doesn't say what it would cost and what the shocking truth is. Thirdly, it's solvable, right? We know that this is very easy to solve because we can just click on a link. We know that's pretty easy to do. And it's relevant because it's really a shocking truth. And this is about what you would pay. This is not what about anybody would pay. This is you. And finally, it's safe, right? On media sites like Upworthy, not on spoofing or phishing sites, it's relatively safe to click a link. And so therefore you would go, oh yeah, okay, click along. So those 4 recipes. Now, how do we design for these? And I would like to basically take those particular 4 features and walk you through some examples taken from games, taken from museum exhibits to tease out some qualities for how to design for these 4 features. The first one of them, and I'm going to spend the least time on that, is safety, right? Make me feel safe. Now, obviously, museum exhibits should be physically safe. I don't know if you ever came across this one. This is a beautiful art exhibit by Edward and Nancy Keenholz, still life, where they basically had this bulletproof box, and in the bulletproof box was a little gun that was loaded and triggered to fire at some point in the next 100 years, and you as a visitor could sign a waiver and just sit yourself in front of that thing for a period of time, right? It is definitely curiosity and fear-inducing because it's unpredictable, highly relevant. You have to wait to solve the puzzle, but anyhow, but I don't mean this kind of physical safety, right? That goes without saying. I mean this kind. I mean social and psychological safety, which when we're talking about adults in museums is the main thing, right? Don't make me look dumb. Don't make me feel stupid. Don't evoke the fear in me that I'll embarrass myself by tinkering around with your interactive or your puzzle and then not knowing how it's going to work, right? So don't involve me in anything I fear I might fail at, or expose me to my friends as a completely wrong-headed bigot, and don't make me publicly inquire things that I know as an adult I should know, basically, right? And again, I'm not talking that much about here how to design so that people don't embarrass themselves or lose the fear of embarrassment, because a couple of years ago in Sweden I actually gave another talk about that. So if you want to Google hacking shyness and then you find a YouTube video with an image of me with little bunny ears on the top, you know that you're in the right place. So if you're interested in designing for this kind of psychological safety, I lead you down that rabbit hole. So on to the second feature, relevance, right? Information has to be relevant for me to care about it, for me to actually be curious in it. And this is a design principle that is core in most current game-based learning, or an insight that really has sunk into current game-based learning. And I think the person who, for me, articulated it best is Katie Salen, wrote one of the major textbooks in game design, and a couple of years ago started Quest to Learn, which is a charter school in the States that basically tries to reinvent the whole curriculum and the way education is structured in a game-like fashion. They have a set of design principles, and the first design principle of these kind of game-like instruction is create a need to know. Create a need to know by organizing learning around complex problems in engaging context, right? If there is not a reason why I should care about something in engaging context, and a problem that makes me care about seeking out a certain information that evokes a certain need to know, I will not care about your information. So how does it play out in practice? Well, in practice, all the educational activities in the school are organized into missions and quests that all have practical, authentic, real-world problems as the setup. So one of these missions, and again, right, you can read it up online, they publish their curriculum and their design principles online for free under Quest to Learn. One of those missions might be hack the election, right? Build a mathematical model to explore and demonstrate how changing voting methods can elect different presidents despite the same votes. Right? That's something people care about. And then suddenly this creates a need to know for students suddenly to get interested in things like voting laws and regulations and voting methods and mathematical modeling and data processing and all that kind of thing. because they're interested in solving this real-world problem in the larger engaging context of electoral politics. Right? This is why brain teasers might be the dumbest thing ever for a lot of people, but once you put them into an escape room, where the overarching need to know is, can you escape in 60 minutes, right? People are willing to walk through all of these brain teasers in a row. So there's a design brief for a museum right there, right? Turn an exhibition into an escape room. Another example that friends of mine at the Dutch design agency Hubbub did in a little curiosity cabinet that's part of a natural history museum. It's called Bestenbeende, is a little game where they have in this curiosity cabinet these weird creatures that are basically stitched together from other creatures, right? So it has the head of an otter and the body of an owl, and then suddenly there's a lizard tail attached to it. And then basically it's a game where children, together with their parents, are tasked to take photos of different things, of other pieces in the exhibit, as evidence to convince the animal in front of them that it's a fish or a fowl or vertebrae or something like that, thereby creating a need to know to A, engage with the other exhibits, and B, to engage with the basic questions. Well, how are these different species and parts of the tree of life differentiated, right? So what makes a fish? What makes a bird a bird? So again, to re-articulate that as a design principle, we should answer and we should design for and we should start with a need to know before we design around the what to know, right? Before we say, well, here's the content around our objects and how do we make interesting stuff about the content. Ask with what are the questions that might actually interest people in this stuff. Now, the important caveat there is that, right, that particularly as educators, you often have the impulse to say, well, everybody should care about the climate, so this should go without saying, so people should come in and care about the climate. But that is the design challenge, to not expect that as a moral ought, but to go in and say, what will make my particular audience actually care about, what will create a need to know about the things that I might have to show and to tell and to talk about. And if you're looking at some kind of design guidance for how to do these, luckily in the actual museum world, right, the ever brilliant Nina Simon already had this wonderful work that she did back in the late 2000s around designing questions for audience participation. But actually design principles for audience participation map pretty neatly on those for cognitive participation, for making me care about something, some information or some exhibit. The nicest example, I think, that she pointed out that I really like is this one in the Ontario Science Centre Facing Mars exhibition, where the whole exhibition just started with this entry piece, which just poses the question to you, would you go to Mars? And then you go through yes or no, and you see how the other people say. And at the end of the exhibition, there is actually the same thing repeated that asks, would you still go to Mars after seeing all the exhibition, right? So what are some of the qualities of this kind of framing question, right? Sometimes the need to know, you can be very straightforward, you can ask a question. So the feature is that this is concrete. This is not, right, will nanotechnology reinvent the future? This is, would you go to Mars? Very concrete question. It's personal. Again, it's about you. It's about something that emotionally connects to you and not about society at large. It's speculative. It invites grappling with. It invites balancing different things, right? It's not as straightforward, there is a one true answer here. And it frames the overall experience, right? It gives us a need to know, but it also gives us a particular perspective on all the stuff that's going to happen after that entry piece. Right now, at every single exhibit, we're going to implicitly bring our need to know, our question, and say, would this affect whether I actually want to go on that Mars trail or not? And it gives you an entry point for every exhibit, because, right, if you talk about things like, I don't know, how are toilets organized on a Mars trip, you know that you have that as a starting point, right? Would you like to have this kind of toilet set up for 5 years in your life? And it's not a knowledge test, right? It's not one, either you know the answer or you don't know. It's something that is more about, would you care about this? So, relevance. Making this relevance, creating a need to know before you're asking yourself, well, what is there to know? The third feature, and that is sort of the biggest brain twist, I think, for standard education and journalism, and maybe exhibition design as well, is to create unpredictability, not predictability, right? You know, the standard journalistic rule of thumb is don't bury the lead. But if you want to design for curiosity, you actually do want to bury the lead. Right? You want to hint at it and you want to reveal it bit by bit, but you don't want to go full front with, here's the information. First, you want to make me curious in the information before you give it to me, right? So again, to repeat it, we need to answer design and start with a need to know, with why is that and that the case, before you give me any piece of information that resolves that need to know, that resolves that open question in my head. Right? To use a confectionery analogy, if content is the kind of candy that we try to make tasty to people, we don't just want to serve it in one undifferentiated immediate blob at them, right? We want to wrap it in little packages that make me interested in how the candy inside might look and taste like, right? So we want to candy wrap the information instead of doing a fudge dump of content at our users all at once. And if that sounds a bit abstract, to give you a practical example, now I'm sure many of you know, right, Radiolab, the science education podcast, which I think is one of the better things to have happened in science education in the past years. And if you continue to listen to those stories, and if not, brilliant, you find a new thing for your commute. If you listen to a lot of those stories, you find that they actually have a pretty interesting sort of standard storytelling pattern in which they build up all their stories. And to take a recent example, From Tree to Shining Tree, that was a story that was released in July this year, which is about mykorrhiza. I don't know if that's the right English pronunciation. In German, so mykorrhiza. Let's stick with that. So here's how Radiolab does mykorrhiza. And if you don't know what that is, great, you're in for a treat. So, Radiolab, the story starts in a forest. And the story starts with a young girl in her early teens loses her dog in the forest, right? Which puts us as listeners automatically on the edge and say, oh my God, right? Will she ever find the dog again or not? And you hear these kind of whelping sounds in forest and you go, oh, please find the dog. And then finally, after searching through the forest, they find that the dog is howling from a deep ditch and it's sitting somewhere among roots and among weird white stuff that's all around the roots, right? So what is this weird white stuff? So we're happy that we found the dog. That's resolved. But what is this weird white stuff? Well, hold that thought. Fast forward, that young girl is now a research scientist who studies forests and trees. And she discovers a peculiar thing, namely, tree species in forests are not fighting against each other. They seem to be connected with each other in some form. Because when a fir tree dies in a forest, it's not as if the birch trees around it get happier. They actually suffer from that as well. So why is that, right? Usually we would assume evolution, there is fight between species. Why do the birch trees suffer from the fir tree dying? Well, let's set up an experiment. So we set up an experiment to see if that might have something to do with the roots of the trees. So we will feed some food to one of the trees with radioactive isotopes and then see whether that stays in the trees or maybe wanders off to the other surrounding birch trees. And ta-da, turns out, yes, actually, trees exchange food with each other through a so-called wood wide web of food exchange. So they form a community of food exchange with each other. And there's even something more, right? If you think back about the weird white stuff with the dog, well, we go out, so we look how the trees do that with these weird roots, how they exchange food. And we find that if we look at the earth that is around the roots, there is 7 miles of this weird white filament in a pinch of dirt around that. So what is that stuff that seems to be everywhere? Turns out it's a fungus. Right? It's a mushroom. It's a weird kind of mushroom. And the filaments are not just mushrooms, they're actually tubes. They're tubes that carry material through the tubes. But why are these tubes there? Why are the fungi doing this kind of exchange of food between trees, and why don't the trees do it themselves? Well, turns out if you study it, trees can't draw minerals from the earth very well. And fungi can't produce carbohydrates, they can't produce sugars. So the trees and the fungi actually enwrap each other and form these weird shared organisms where they exchange sugar for minerals with each other. Now, we know how trees get sugars, right? Photosynthesis, but how the heck do the fungi get minerals, right? Well, turns out fungi actually mine pebbles in the ground by dissolving them with acid. And they do the same thing with insects. They grow into insects and suck the nitrate out of insects and then feed that stuff to the trees, right? So the insect that might sit on the tree might actually be secretly feeding the tree later on. And then you would say, well, is that a nice side story, but how big is that? It turns out actually 80% of the sugars, up to 80% of the sugars that trees produce, go all to the fungi. And vice versa, almost all the minerals that the fungi produce actually go to the trees. And there's more. The trees actually talk to each other when there's a threat through chemicals through the fungi in the ground. So, right, does that suggest that trees and fungi maybe form something like a superorganism, a kind of big brain in the forest? And that's where the story ends. Right? But that is the basic structure. There's always a piece of information that resolves a need to know that I gave you before, and then that piece of information leads to the next need to know, bit by bit by bit by bit. You're always, it's kind of, right, tease and release, tease and release, tease and release, in little driplets. Versus if you look at a standard science ad book or presentation or an exhibition, it might look like something like that, right? What are mycorrhizal fungi? They are naturally occurring beneficial fungi that form a symbiotic relationship with plants, attach to roots, and become extensions of the root system. Yada, 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 in one slide, right? In short, a fudge dump, right? I get all the information in one big dump instead of a tease and release that actually makes me care about bit by bit by bit about the information that is served to me. So, creating unpredictability that teases me, that makes me interested in the resolution of that unpredictability. And to give a bit of guidance on that, originally 5, but because of time reasons it's 4, but the actual 5 are in the slides, so if you're interested, go to the slides and you'll find the 5th one. 4 forms of unpredictability you might use. The first one is novelty. Right? We're curious about novel experiences, and it might be simulated life experiences that we never had before. That is something that makes us naturally curious. Right? This is basically the universal what-if question, right? That every kid asks when you try to nudge everything and eat everything and scratch everything just because you don't know how it tastes and you don't know how it feels, right? So you're interested in learning the sensorial experience of all the world around you. And the truth is, right, the same even holds for our adults, right? We are likewise interested in novel experiences, sensorial experience that we never had before. This one here is a piece by Olafur Eliasson in the Light Museum in my hometown, actually. It's just basically rainfall to both sides, but then against stroboscope lights, so all the rain droplets just appear as if they were standing still in air before you. It's actually dozens or thousands of raindrops passing by the same piece, but you can see raindrops basically frozen in light in front of you. And that's the one where people never want to leave the room, because it's just such an exciting new experience to actually see rain droplets hanging in the sky, in the weird shapes in which they are. So, novel sensorial experiences. Another thing is just keeping people engaged with new and changing content, different things. So if you go to the exhibit this time, it's not going to be all there, it's going to be something different next time. My favorite example for internet time sinks that are all about just novel content is do not press the red button. Who knows do not press the red button? Okay, the others can Google do not press the red button and we'll spend about 20 to 30 minutes. So it's basically just this little flash app that says do not press. Oh, what does the human do, the curious one? Of course you press. And then what happens? This happens. Do not press. Okay, I'll press again. You pressed again. Okay, punk, press it again. Now try to press it. Loser. And then, ha! I pressed the button with this penguin. Now what are you going to do? Which one is it? Not so smart, are you? You're a clever one. Time for round 2. And this goes on for like 20 minutes. And you're going to press all the buttons all the way through. Right? Just because you're always curious, what's the next thing this thing will come up with? What's the next thing this thing will come up with? One example for varied experience, that what is the next thing that they're going to come up with? This year by Alex Schweder, Wall to Floor to Ceiling, I saw it in the Israeli Design Museum, is basically just an exhibit room that changes. And other than the novel sensorial experiences, right? We as adults likewise like to sit on huge plushy furry things that blow up and blow down. The space changes the whole time because different pieces of the space get inflated and deflated. And in order to actually experience everything of the space, you have to stay in for like 20, 30 minutes. And you're actively curious and you actually stay in. And it might make you claustrophobic if suddenly the roof comes down, but it's quite a thing. So, right, if you don't reveal all of the content at once, if you know that there's always something else, you make people wonder what else there might be. hidden. You actually stoke the curiosity. So, novelty. The second one, hinting and hiding. So telling me that there is something and that there is something relevant without already revealing what that something is. To give an example for good hinting and hiding, here's a fictional example from a video game. Which of these three screen displays are more curiosity-inducing? Is it this one? So we see a little guy and we see a little trader and we see a crystal. Or is it this one? We see that and there's this weird red-purple thing lighting up. Or we see that, so we're there and we see there in this hidden area, we know for sure there's a sword. Right? Who would, just for you spontaneously, is that one more curiosity-inducing? Show of hands. The middle one? The right one. The middle one, yeah. So far every audience said the middle one, right? It tells me that there's something, but it doesn't tell me what it is, but it seems to be interestingly relevant to me, right, with this kind of lineup. So the effect here, obviously, in video games is called fog of war. So in games like Command and Conquer, you might say, okay, the enemy basis is there. I don't know what the land in between is. There could be something dangerous there, but I'm really interested, therefore, in finding out what is there in between because I know I want to get there. The curiosity gap in Upworthy is all about hinting and hiding, right? It's telling me that there is a relevant information without giving me the information. LinkedIn as a website is a master in teasing you in with this kind of hinting and hiding, right? 8 people in the last 15 days have seen your profile, including someone at this interesting company. You want to know who they are? Upgrade your account. Sebastian, he was interested in you. So-and-so and 84 others have checked out your profile. I know the faces of those, but I don't know the other faces yet. I would like to see who that is. Or you get these kind of emails that say, hey, right, check out so-and-so's new job. And I know who the person is, so this is immediately relevant to me, but I don't know what the job is. So therefore, in order to find that out, I actually have to click the link. Or something like, well, you haven't filled in your profile. See how you rank in terms of how complete your profile is compared to other users, and therefore how likely it is that you get new leads through that. So there's your immediate relevance, but I don't tell you how you rank unless you click the link, at which point you're already one step closer to giving us more information. One of the practical examples for that I found is actually in York, in the York Castle Museum, where they put up this World War I exhibition, where you walk through the World War I exhibition, which is sort of trying to take you through a very compressed life of a soldier from being recruited to getting back from the field. And when you walk through there, you see this little weird thing here, and then you notice that there is actually this ditch that you can go in if you're a child, if you're big enough as a child. So you know that there's something. You can't really from either side look in to understand everything that's hidden in there, but therefore you're immediately curious to find out what is in there. And no, I don't fit, unfortunately. Another practical, beautiful example for me are immersive theater productions by companies like Punch Drunk, like The Drowned Man, if any of you have been there. So which are basically these kind of distributed, super complex stories that are not linearly told through you, but they're distributed through the space, and there's lots of stuff happening, and you basically have to go to the piece 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 times in order to piece together what is actually happening, but you know something is happening. And it turns out that a lot of their storytelling is actually environmental. So all the characters in those pieces, in this vast open space that you can freely explore by walking around, have kind of their abodes, and in these abodes then you find objects, or you find weird notes written on mirrors, or you find letters, etc. And all of those give extra information. So if you're really interested and diligent, you might dig something up that gives you background information that makes the overall story and plot that much richer to you, right? So everything here hints at there are deeper stories underneath the main plot and action, but it doesn't give it away unless you actually put in effort in order to resolve that. Speaking of which, unresolved complexity, right? We are curious about ambiguous meanings or unclear ways to get from one point to the other, right? We're curious in finding out what the solution to something is that we care about. This, to me, is one of the main reasons we have stuff like interactives in museums, right? Because if you do it right, the interactive puts the question in me, how do these weird Klatny thingies work? And then you give me the explanation. If you do it the other way around, you give me the explanation, then I try out, you ruined the story. But if you first let me interact with it, now I'm getting interested in finding out how that thing works. A practical example that I really liked, a recent one, at the New Scientist Festival is this one here, Space on Earth by Sefran Parker, which actually combines a couple of curiosity things. So it's basically this little game where you put on actual astronaut gloves and you try in competition with somebody else to be the first to tie some knots or do other tasks with these astronaut gloves. So this is novel experience. I want to know how it feels like to be in an astronaut glove, right? And I want to know if I can find out if I'm able to tie a knot with that thing and if I'm going to be better at that than my friends. That's the unresolved complexity. We did a prototype for BBC back in the day where we were wondering, can we make people curious and interested in actually watching online video? So likewise, we wrapped a little unresolved complexity, a challenge around videos. In this case, is life on Miranda possible or not? So you watch the little video, and in order to make that interesting and in order to motivate you to watch the video to the end, we had a little betting game where you could bet a certain amount of stuff. Either it is possible or it is not possible. But the longer the video played, the harder it would get for you, the less you could actually change the stakes in your bet, right? So there you had a challenge where you tried to extract as much information of the video to make your bet as fast as possible, but you were still interested in watching the video to the conclusion to figure out whether you made the right decision or not. Okay, final unresolved complexity, possibility spaces. We're curious and we feel autonomous in front of an untested possibility space. Something where we go, what is possible here? What could I do with this? What if I try this or that, right? The standard physical example for possibility spaces is Legos, right? It's just small pieces loosely joined that I can recombine in interesting new possible combinations. And there are lots of games for kids that do this kind of Lego model pretty well. The games done by the company Toka Boca are a nice example, like Toka Hair Salon, right? Where you can have all of these kind of tools in order to put different kinds of hairdos on animals. And you're always curious, well, what happens if I now color this red? What happens if I now use the hair dryer on this thing that I did, etc. And people are typically, with digital media, pretty good to find possibility spaces everywhere that they play around with and explore the possibilities, right? When Facebook changed it to that, people started to mess around with this way of the design. When Facebook changed the design again, people again started to find out how can I do art with that, or with Pinterest boards. Practical examples in museum is something like this one here in the refurbished Exploratorium, right, where you just get basic tools to kind of do your own Rube Goldberg machine or your own marbles wall. Or this one that was done in the Barbican recently in 2015, where they had their Charles and Ray Eames exhibition. Right, when Ray and Charles Eames as designers actually did these kind of weird useless toys, and in order to play with that for the family game, they did the light machine, which is basically a glorified projector, and then gave people a prompt like your last day out or something like that, and then just gave them pre-constrained materials and say, make a picture to that prompt however you would like. And people just had to go at it and played around with it and created their own art. Okay, final one. And then I'm done. Solveability. It has to be solvable. And my favorite example for making something solvable is actually this TED course by Dan Meyer about redesigning math classes, where he says typical math education is really crappy because the kind of instructions, the kind of tasks that you get in math have the following shape, right? A water tank in the form of a regular octagonal prism. The base octagon has a side length of 11.9 centimeters. Da, 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 da. What's the surface? What's the volume? If you pour water in, how long would it take? Right? And this is basically a quiz. Either you know all the equations or you don't. So this is either trivial or it's impossible. So what he did in order to redesign it is take away all of that and say, how long would it take to fill the tank? Then he said to the students, you can ask me any question about any math equation and I will share the equation with you, but you have to find a solution path to get at that answer. Giving the students a practical need to know, and giving the students something that they could solve with their own cognitive capacity, even if they didn't know the answer already, by walking through those steps, right? So this is essentially puzzle design. This is about designing good puzzles. And what makes a good puzzle is that it's not trivial. You know the answer or you don't, right? Or, okay, I turned the lever, so that's trivial. And it's not impossibly hard, right? I don't know the answer, there's no way. It sits in a sweet spot in between where with my own powers of reasoning and deduction, I sort of can find a path to it, right? The problem is with a lot of educational design, if we design puzzles, we actually design quizzes, and quizzes are essentially both trivial and impossible. They're trivial if you know the answer, they're impossible if you don't, right? While quiz design, right? And the same thing actually holds for these kind of hide and reveal flaps in lots of museums, right? It's a quiz. You know the answer or you don't. There is no way for you to actually puzzle your way through. Whereas the sweet spot lies in the middle, where with powers of which resources do I use, who do I call, what can I exclude by deduction, you actually can get at the answer, and you feel good if you get at the answer. So, summarizing, curiosity is a powerful motive. We can stoke it by inviting people to a relevant, safe, solvable unpredictability. For that, we need to help people safely expose their lack of knowledge by doing so. We have to give them a need to know before we're telling them what's to know. We have to give them puzzles that are able and proud to solve. And we shouldn't fudge dump our content on us. We should unwrap ourselves and our content bit by bit, teasing people in the course with novel experiences, hinting and hiding, unresolved complexity, and rich possibility spaces. Thank you.
So we've got just a little bit of time for a few quick questions. Do we have any questions? Great, over there. We've got a mic coming down. Just while the mic's coming down to you, if you're in the overflow room, thank you for letting us know that it's hard to see the slides and that it's hard to hear. We'll talk to AV in the break and get that sorted out for you. Thanks.
This is very quick because it's kind of trivial. Did you find her dog? You set up the information need, and then I was taking such good notes. I was like, did you find the dog?
They found the dog, yes. The dog is good.
Mic up in the back.
Mia actually mentioned this in a tweet, so I'm cheating a bit. But the dark art of clickbait is but a gnat's whisker away from some of this stuff. Is there a way of doing this right and doing this wrong?
I think the impulse that we have, because we're about open knowledge sharing, is to give all the information away and therefore not bait people into doing stuff. And there is definitely a threshold where I might, as a visitor or as a user, go, oh, come on, don't, right? I am interested already, right? You don't need to put me through this extra effort and through this extra frustration. And I think there is no easy answer to that other than figuring out through prototyping with your own audience what their knowledge level is. So if there needs to be a curiosity stoked before you can show the information, or if they go, I know the answer already, in which case you don't need to do all of that, but in that case you probably also don't need to put the information there in the first place. So I think the answer is working out in the process with people how to do that without frustrating them, but generally stoking curiosity. And maybe, right, that is one thing that a lot of games likewise do, is to offer multiple paths. So if you're the expert user and you're already really caring about this, then here's your way, here's your cheat way. And if you're not, well, then here's our curated path for the novice in this piece. Yeah.
Okay. One more quick question.
Yeah.
So we'll go to the break, and for people who either don't like raising their hand and waiting for a mic to come to you, or people in the streaming room, we are taking questions on Twitter using @UKMCG or with the hashtag. I'm not being rude and ignoring you all, I'm just checking for questions. So please join me in thanking Sebastian, and then let's go get some tea and coffee.